The neglect or complicity of authorities regarding the expansion of organized crime in parts of Rio de Janeiro represents one of the biggest failures of Brazilian public administration in recent decades. This situation reveals a severe collapse of security policies spanning successive governments without any structural transformation of the problem. Let's break down why this happened. First, the state simply abandoned entire regions. This wasn't just a lack of policing, but a complete absence of healthcare, education, transportation, and basic sanitation. This power vacuum allowed criminal groups like drug trafficking factions to step in and act as parallel governments. They impose their own laws, control territories, and even provide favors, creating a kind of state within a state. At the same time, official security policies relied on flashy, one-off operations. Think dramatic police raids that grab headlines, but don't translate into a lasting state presence or effective intelligence work. This war on drugs logic turned entire communities into battlegrounds, offering no real future for the local youth who were left trapped in the crossfire. And we can't ignore the deep-seated institutional corruption. For years, and even today, there are police officers, politicians, and business people involved with these criminal schemes, especially the militia. This web of interests blocks any genuine attempt at change. Corruption ensures that the law never reaches those who should be punished, and it completely erodes public trust in institutions. While crime was modernizing and diversifying, the state remained archaic. There was no sustained investment in culture, sports, job training, or employment opportunities in vulnerable communities. For young people without prospects, crime often looks like the only viable path, sometimes the only profitable and accessible one. Over time, this has led to a normalization of violence and segregation. Parts of the city are treated as enemy territories and their residents as second-class citizens. This twisted logic allows the state to justify both its absence and its excessive force, without ever addressing the root cause of the problem. The security crisis in Rio is a reflection of a state that has given up on being a state in certain areas. When authority abdicates its role, another power takes its place. The price is devastating. Lost lives, a divided society, and a weakened nation. Breaking this cycle requires more than just police operations. It demands political courage, a real fight against corruption, deep social policies, and the restoration of a fair and effective state presence where it currently doesn't exist. The collapse of public security in Rio de Janeiro is a complex phenomenon, reflecting decades of misguided political decisions, chronic social inequality, and systemic corruption. It's an institutional collapse that goes far beyond the police. It's a failure of public governance as a whole. Let's look at the fragmentation of the territory. Rio has become a patchwork of zones under different controls, drug trafficking factions, militias, and police forces. The state has lost or, in some cases, ceded its monopoly on the legitimate use of force. Drug factions traditionally control favelas. Militias, often formed by former police officers, dominate suburban areas through extortion and violence. And the state, it acts sporadically, reactively, and often in a militarized way without maintaining a continuous presence. In this environment, violence has become routine. Gunfights, armored vehicles in residential streets, and helicopters firing into densely populated areas are tragically normal. Life in many communities is defined by fear, disruption, and a constant lack of basic rights. This creates collective trauma, drives residents away, and normalizes barbarity. Meanwhile, the criminal economy has become far more sophisticated than the state. While the government is stuck in outdated bureaucracy, crime has diversified. We're talking drug trafficking, cargo theft, and control of essential services like cooking gas, illegal cable TV, and alternative transportation. Militias, in particular, often operate like businesses with political connections and institutional influence, making them even more dangerous than traditional trafficking. This exposes a fundamental flaw. The Brazilian state is tough on the poor but permissive with the powerful. In wealthy, tourist-heavy areas of Rio, security is guaranteed. In the favelas, the approach is militarized and often lethal. This selectivity reinforces a cycle of exclusion and sends a clear message that some lives are worth less than others. The consequences are devastating. Children can't go to school because of police operations. Residents are held hostage by curfews. Health workers have to navigate conflict zones to do their jobs, and police officers themselves are often underpaid, poorly equipped, and dangerously exposed. When a citizen stops trusting the police and starts depending on a faction or a militia to solve daily problems, the social contract is broken. So what's the solution? Rio doesn't need more war. It needs preventative policies, education, employment, and urbanization. It needs a structural reform of the police with better training, external oversight, and a focus on intelligence. It needs a head-on fight against corruption and its links to politics. And most importantly, it needs to reintegrate its territory, not with military force, but with the civil presence of a functioning state. The collapse in Rio is not just a police problem. It's an ethical, political, and social one. But this isn't an unsolvable problem. Other cities around the world have faced similar crises and found paths to recovery. Let's look at what we can learn from them. Take Medellin, Colombia. In the 80s and 90s, it was the most violent city in the world, the heart of Pablo Escobar's cartel, but it underwent a profound transformation. How, through social urbanism, they made massive investments in public transport, schools, parks, and cultural centers, specifically in the poorest, most violent neighborhoods. This was combined with integrated actions between the justice system, police, and social policies, along with a strong push for community participation. The lesson from Medellin is clear. You could reduce violence without social inclusion and a continuous state presence. Now let's look at Naples, Italy, which has lived under the shadow of the Camorra Mafia for decades. Their fight involved creating specific laws against organized crime, with a key focus on confiscating the assets of mafia. They also established robust protection for informants. Crucially, civil society got involved, with NGOs transforming confiscated properties into schools, cooperatives, and cultural centers. The lesson from Naples is that fighting organized crime requires not just police action, but political courage and a direct assault on the criminal economy. And in the United States, Chicago faced waves of violence from armed gangs. Their response combined tough laws against money laundering and illegal weapons with significant investments in police intelligence. They also developed community programs to steer young people away from gangs and implemented police reforms for greater transparency and use of technology. Chicago teaches us that repression alone, without social justice and gun control, simply doesn't work. So, what can Rio de Janeiro learn from all this? First, inclusive urbanization. Like in Rio needs to invest heavily in infrastructure in areas dominated by crime, not just with police, but with transportation, culture, education, and healthcare. Second, it needs to dismantle the financial power of factions and militias, just like in Italy. This means tracking money laundering and seizing illicit assets. Third, a professional and accountable police force is essential, with better training, technology, and independent oversight. And finally, a swift and protective justice system with witness protection programs and a focus on dismantling the top of the criminal hierarchy. Let's imagine how these lessons could be applied specifically to Rio's unique reality. First, the Medellin model of social urbanism. This means prioritizing the poorest and most violent neighborhoods for state investment. Imagine urbanizing favelas with dignified transport like cable cars and elevators, proper sanitation, and public squares. Picture new schools, cultural centers, and sports facilities being built in the very heart of communities currently dominated by crime. This creates alternatives. When a young person sees opportunities for a future beyond crime, the recruitment power of gangs diminishes. The city starts to recognize its residents instead of treating them as a problem. Next, applying the Naples model to dismantle the criminal economy. In Italy, they weakened the mafia by taking away its wealth. In Rio, this would mean mapping, confiscating, and repurposing properties, businesses, and land used by militias and traffickers. Imagine turning a militia headquarters into a daycare center or an illegal land grab into a community garden. This requires heavy investment in financial intelligence to track shell companies and money laundering. When the state takes back control of services that militias exploit, their power and legitimacy crumble. Then there's police reform, inspired by Chicago and other cities. This has to start with creating a truly independent civilian oversight body to investigate abuse and corruption. Police salaries must be increased, but tied to better technical and ethical training. The focus should shift from militarized raids to community policing, with officers building trust in the neighborhoods they serve. And technology like body cameras and data analysis should be used to increase transparency and effectiveness. A less corrupt, more professional police force can regain public trust, which is essential for the community to help combat crime instead of fearing the authorities. Finally, a fast and effective justice system. All successful models show that crime only weakens when justice is swift and certain. This means agile trials for high-level leaders of factions and militias. It requires robust protection programs for witnesses and informants, especially residents of dominated areas. It also means rethinking mass incarceration for minor drug offenses to focus resources on taking down organized crime, a strategy that has shown success elsewhere. When residents see powerful criminals being brought to justice and the state remaining present, they begin to trust in a better future, not in the power of crime. Rio de Janeiro faces a tragic mix of state neglect, deep inequality, and organized violence. But these international examples show that reversing the chaos is possible It requires political courage, social engagement, and structural decisions that go far beyond sporadic military operations. The road is long, but it's a path toward a city where every citizen in every neighborhood can live with dignity and security. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis insightful, please like this video, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives, and share your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.